Do you love the lizard men? Well, some of you do, but the lizard men don't get a lot of love. Look at these poor skinks. They're so skinky. No love from anybody. If you don't love those skinks, well, you should, because you know what? They've got a lot of uses on the battlefield, and I think that more people should be taking a look at it and thinking about making a good old skinky army. Let's jump into it. Alright, so what's the composition of my all-skink army? Getting skinky with it, apparently. Yeah, so my all-skink army is 6 skink cohorts. Big surprise. Skink army, skink cohort, right? I know. I'm pulling out the wild cards on this one, folks. I've got 2 Bastillodons with solar engines. Also, because they're manned with skinks. On the far flanks, you can see, way out here in the distance, I have a couple of feral stegodons, one on each flank, and they are being supported by a skink cohort with javelins. So this is basically the same as the skink cohort, but they have several volleys of javelins that they can use prior to entering combat. I've got Lord Mazdamundi. Why? Well, he's not a skink, he's a slan. Well, but there's no skink that I can bring as a main lord, and looks like that he just about took a crotch shot there. He might want to close his legs while he's sitting. But yes, Lord Mazdamundi with Ruination of Cities, and also we've got Banishment. And then I got a couple other spells on him for healing and whatever else is needed. In the back, I've got 4 chameleon skinks. You can see them approaching from behind what is a Dawi defensive geometry. I know, we just got done talking about Dawi defensive geometries, but they're still here. You still find them, folks, and sometimes they work. So yeah, 4 chameleon skinks. These guys are meant to be anti-slayers or meant to be anti-artillery skirmishers, whatever the dwarf chooses to place near the rear of his box. We are up against none other than Ungrim, the Iron Fist, who's going to sell at anti-large unless he gets pounced on by multiple large units. Yes, I just said that. He's an anti-large lord who gets beat around by large units. That's right, you heard me correct. Yep, and then as far as Ungrim's army, he's got a couple of iron breakers, and then up front, he's got a unit of miners with blasting charges, so he's trying to blow me up front. He's got long beards in the flank. Good pick, generally speaking, against the lizardmen, because the lizardmen don't typically have great armor-piercing infantry. He's got 2 thunderers, and with this kind of terrain, the thunderers could be quite useful. 2 giant slayers also makes a lot of sense versus the lizardmen. And then a bolt thrower, again, also makes a lot of sense versus the lizardmen. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start focusing down the giant slayers. They don't have shields. They'll be somewhat vulnerable to the chameleon skinks and this Busy's units that he otherwise needs in order to try and kill my dinosaurs more quickly. I am going to approach his front lines with my traditional skink cohorts, and then I'm going to approach his flanks with the skink cohorts and the stegodons. I'm trying to make sure that my opponent's attention is focused in multiple directions, and if you want to win with an all-skink army, you're not going to do it with brute force. Not by infantry, at least. You're going to have to spread out, divide, and conquer your opponent by using the skinks to outnumber your opponent on basically every front, using the magic of someone like Mazdamundi or a skink spellcaster. Yeah, let you kind of see what's going on. He's already starting to throw some of his first volleys of satchel charges, and yes, it hurts. It hurts a lot. My Ruination of Cities did some decent damage. I'm going to drop a Banishment right here on his Iron Breakers and try and do some more damage. Looking for expensive units with these spells. I also could have charged in a single dinosaur unit to try and create a blob to use these things, and it very well could have been worthwhile. That's another strategy that you should keep in mind. You can see that our initial assault on the front of his Dawi defensive geometry ended just like I said it would if someone's crazy enough to attack from the front. I'm not crazy, I'm just skinky. Anyway, Ungrim's going to come try and get a hold of Mazdamundi. No big surprise there. And you can see over here his guns and other units are working down one of my stegodons. But we've also met some initial success over here with our skinks, and our chameleon skinks have done a good job of keeping units busy in the background and just continuing to poison the dwarves in the vicinity. Very much working to our favor to slow down their already slow attacks. can see here that I'm able to punch through with the Feral Stegodon. And then Mazdamundi, I'm going to get him away from Ungrim Iron Fist, but this is a desperate fight to say the least. Although I caused a lot of damage on one flank, it wasn't enough, and a lot of my skinks have routed and will soon be rejoining combat. I'm going to move up my solar engines and pick a new target and begin to fire. I'm going to really try and get rid of the bolt thrower. Its anti-large bolts are a danger to both my Bastillodons and Lord Mazdamundi. So we're going to take it out of the game. So our 2 solar engines should do well. Again, chameleon skinks in the background just trying to wreak havoc. The dwarves have to cut their way through hundreds of skinks while trying to deal with stegodons, and it's not going to be easy for them. In fact, it's going to make things quite difficult. You can see, though, Ungrim being very persistent about trying to stay after Mazdamundi, but Ungrim's problem is that he can get stopped too easily by infantry or basically anything. So Ungrim, if he does get a chance to sit there and hit your lord, he will do a lot of damage, but he is very easy to stop. That's really the long and short of it. And like I said earlier, if he gets attacked by multiple large units, he'll fall apart because he can't get any hits because he's getting ragdolled around like the little tiny dwarf he is. Another ruination of cities. That one's not going to be spectacular. It does a little bit of work. Just need to use that magic to the best of my ability here. Blobs would be good, but there's not exactly a blob. He held to his formations here. That's actually hurting me worse than anything else. Stegodon's still doing some work, though we are short one Stegodon. This one has shattered over here, so definitely not good for us. I'm going to go ahead and put a couple of hits on Ungrim here with my Bastillodons. These guys are anti-infantry, anti-armor. They can put a lot of damage down on infantry units, or Ungrim for that matter. You see Mazdamundi, we're just going to keep him at a safe distance. Let our skinks, let our other units wear down the enemy army. I'm going to throw my chameleon skinks into combat. I threw a banishment in there to get rid of these miners with blasting charges. Definitely a weird target, though. I should have probably picked the iron breakers and just backed my infantry out. Yeah, at this point in the battle, my skinks are taking a beating in combat. There's a lot of Dawi left, and Mazdamundi took a bit of a beating a couple of times from the main dwarf himself here, Ungrim. You can see that he's going to have to run away. The Rune of Wrath and Ruin is making him incredibly slow, at only 18 speed. So, great for me. I'm trying to take some pot shots at Ungrim, but it's not really doing much. And then back over here, I am able to keep a whole bunch of units tied down for a very long time with chameleon skinks. Their poison weaponry does a good job of accomplishing that. You can see that Ungrim is on the hunt again, and with Mazdamundi being so slow, there is a very real chance that I get caught here. And I notice that my Bastillodons are not hitting him, so at this point, we're just going to have to bite the bullet, or in this case, the dwarf, and just take him out. So this is where I'm going to show you that, obviously it's a video about using skinks, but we'll throw this tip in here too. Don't be fooled about what Ungrim can do versus large units. The problem is that he spends all of his time on the ground like a ragdoll, and you don't get any hits when you're on the ground. So although he is anti-large, the chances of him being effective anti-large are low. Right now my Bastillodons were on guard mode, by the way, which is a mistake I made here. But I'm going to bring all my big monsters in, and we'll show Ungrim pretty quickly that being a slayer might require him to find a mount so that he doesn't get knocked around. But this is the problem with Ungrim. And if you find yourself late in a game with him as your only defense against a large unit, this is where you're going to find yourself in life. And every time he takes a big hit from these units, it's going to take off a ton of health from him, because these units are anti-infantry except for Mazdamundi. But Mazdamundi has magical attacks as well. So Ungrim's going to find himself in the place where you would think he wants to be, which is fighting large monsters. But that's actually the place he doesn't want to be. So, again, kind of a conundrum for Ungrim. There were some guns that regrouped. I'm going to chase them down with some regrouping skinks. Keep them busy. We can't allow his guns to do their armor-piercing work against my monsters, because my monsters can now pretty much win the game. Ungrim does get away just barely here. So I'm going to go ahead and take a shot at him, and we'll ignore him. You can see that Ungrim's going to just barely escape our grasp and just try and stay alive, which is going to help the dwarves hold their leadership together. There's also a runesmith who's helping with said things, but you can see that he now also realizes, hey, this isn't really where I want to be in life. I'm going to stop chasing the dinosaur. Speaking of dinosaurs, we gotta go get rid of these guns. But my Stegodon got caught on an animation here, and we continue to fail to stop the guns until my skinks get free. Skinky skinks. Don't underestimate the skinks, folks. So my skinks created a huge problem for the dwarves to deal with. It's just an enormous number of skinks. You can see that they're still chasing my other skinks around the map. So yeah, I mean, just skinks everywhere. And you can see the trouble it created. Ungrim's down at 37 hit points. I'm trying to finish him off with this chameleon skink, and he's down to 22. But we aren't quite able to get to him here before this miner is going to start closing the distance on us. But at this point, the good news is Ungrim is hardly a threat because he has to stay away from us, and as long as we can deal with these guns and keep them from firing, Ungrim is now dead. And this is going to mean that the dwarves are going to find themselves in a very tough place. I'm going to do some Curse of the Midnight Wind here. It takes away armor and helps me take out these dwarves even better. At this point, our all-skink army has used its skink powers. Of course, because the skinks sacrificed themselves. So I guess that's the lesson behind a skink army, is the skinks are kind of the sacrifice, and the other units are your hammer. So, yes. Can you win with an all-skink army? Yep. It was quite close here. It was a tough one. Well, Air, what when you're not fighting the dwarves? They just sit still. What about when you end up against other armies and other factions? That's a fair question. Let's take a look at the results of this real quick, and then I'll show you another scenario where we went in an all-out skink army. In this case, again, you can see that the skink cohorts don't buy you very many kills. That's kind of to be expected. I'd already put chevrons on a lot of these units, so no, they did not earn the chevron. The main damage has to come from your monsters and your lord. The skinks are the distraction. They're the filler. They're there to tire out your enemies, keep them busy, split them up, put them in a position where you can use your dinosaurs more effectively. And yeah, in any case, hope you all enjoyed that one. Let's go take a look at another one to try and demonstrate the all-skink mayhem. So skinky. I guess I said when this was an all-skink army, I somewhat lied, because this time I've got Krockgar with me as well, but I haven't put him on Grimlock. I guess just to make sure that this can't too badly be countered as an all-skink army. Check out that firing position just over the edge of the hill. So I've brought 2 solar engines again. I need to give myself a ranged advantage, and then also if there was dragons, I wanted solar engines because they tend to be quite good against dragons. You can see that we're going to be facing Malekith, but let me introduce you to this skink army. 2 solar engines deployed with Krockgar for anti-large support, because he is going to be anti-large in his any form, I guess. I've got my 6 skink cohorts over here. This time they're supported by their larger skink-friendly brethren, the Kroxigors. And I've been told that this is somewhat lore-friendly, at least, for the skinks to be playing with the Kroxigors here. And I've got a skink priest leading the main army over here. So Krockgar is kind of the distraction this time, and the skink army is being led by a true skink atop his Stegodon here. So this is a skink priest, Lore of Beast. He's here to use his Doomflock and Curse of Under Air successfully. And then I wouldn't leave home in a skink army without my chameleon skinks, but at this point they had to deploy quite a long ways away from the elves, and we are up against a dark elf army of bleak swords up front with good chevronage. They're backed up by witch elves, and there are black arc corsairs with handbows. His army is perfectly capable of causing a lot of damage to my army, and then Malekith is also going to be a pretty threatening figure on the battlefield. Let's take a look at the overhead. Alright, so you can see via the overhead map here that the Dark Elf player deployed traditionally, expecting to find me deployed opposite of him, when in fact what I did was I put my whole army on his left flank. I'm hoping that this means that'll turn his army this way, and that that'll give my skink skirmishers time to catch up from behind him. And at this point, the bait is working. I really wanted any units that could to come chase my Bastiladons with solar engines, and then find themselves up against Krockgar, who's a pretty tough cat, and he won't be able to deal with the Bastiladons and the solar engines. So Malekith is being led on the chase that we need to. So right now, strategically, the plan here is to hit this flank hard, follow it up with chameleon skinks. I've got the skink priest and I've got the Kroxigors. We want to start with the decimation of the right flank of the Dark Elves. And as we go into real time here, you can see that I am actually delaying the battle momentarily. Sometimes it's okay to fall back, especially when you know your army doesn't have the strength that it needs right here. So I'm going to fall back, and I'm going to buy my chameleon skinks time to enter the battle, and that allows me to continue to kite Malekith and cause damage. When Malekith lands, we're going to attack him with Kroq-Gar. I really wanted to bring Hand of the Gods, but I didn't quite have money, which that would have allowed me to hit Malekith in the air potentially too. You can see Kroq-Gar's large, anti-large bonus here. Large, anti-large, yeah, I know. Anyway, we can drive Malekith out of the fight. He really doesn't want to be there. He's overmatched. He's going to bring some spears up to try and support himself. At this point, my opponent still doesn't know about my chameleon skinks, and I'm falling back, drawing his army forward. Here I see a good opportunity for a Doomflock. I could get several of his units at once. And at this point, we're going to turn and fight. We've drawn him back to where we want him. We now have the cover of the woods against his skirmishers, and we're going to come in and go ahead and attack. Here comes the Witch Elves, and then the Kroxigors are going to come in as well. Kroxigors have a bonus versus infantry and should be pretty effective. Malekith found himself frustrated with my solar engines, only to turn around and find chameleon skinks and to find himself further frustrated. Dragons really do not like being punished by a lot of chameleon skinks, though I am being chased by these Dark Elf Spearmen. I've got to fight Malekith. I saw him coming down, so Kroq-Gar comes over to immediately try and get a piece of this fight. Since the dragon is focused on my Bastiladon, it allows Kroq-Gar to get the hits that he needs. I blast back the Spearmen temporarily, and then I'm going to put a Cold-Blooded on this Stegodon to try and keep it alive longer. And you can see that between the solar engine firing and the hits from Kroq-Gar, we put a huge beating down on Malekith, and we force him to start trying to get away. And then in the infantry fight, although it's a little bit tough in some areas, the blobbing of the enemy units makes my Doomflock extremely effective, and the Witch Elves are not able to stop Kroxigors, even if they bewitch a whole bunch of my units. And now, once the enemy lines get a little bit weak in a few spots, I'm going to bring the Skink Priests through and just start wreaking havoc on all these Black Art Corsair handbows. And if I can get a route going with Terror, which I did, so I'm using the Terror on this unit, and now that we've gotten all these units routing, we can chase them down with our chameleon skinks, which is going to be our poor skinks cavalry here. Now Kroq-Gar can easily hold his own against all this infantry for long enough. We're going to run away from the Blackguard, and Malekith continues to get hit by distractionary units that are not worth his time. He needed to support the infantry fight against the Skink Priest. The solar engines were meant to be a difficult-to-ignore distraction, and that right there is why they're difficult to ignore. Dragon just took a shot to the neck from that solar engine. But being poisoned by the chameleon skinks and held in place is also bad. And again, we've got a whole spear unit here being held down by Kroq-Gar. It's not much of a problem. Malekith continues to take shots, and all these routed Black Art Corsairs will never make it back into the fight because they're being escorted off the battlefield. Meanwhile, the infantry fight wrapped up in my favor. The Kroxigors were too much for the enemy infantry to handle, both of them picking up at least 50 kills already. That anti-infantry bonus and not having dedicated anti-large there for the elves spelled disaster. Because the Kroxigors, they've picked up some buffs. I don't know that they're amazing these days, but they're good. They're good. So the strategy here worked. Deploy on a flank, focus on a flank, split up the enemy, get them into positions where I want them. So the Lizardmen, the all-skink army can actually be a fun avenue to take. It's not going to win you every battle. You're going to lose battles with it. But if you can employ it craftily, it creates a very difficult situation for your opponent. And the reason that is because of numbers. It puts you all over the battlefield, and there's some units that the skinks can field that while they may not cause a ton of damage, they can be difficult to deal with. Like chameleon skinks are a good example. How do you ignore them? How do you deal with them? If you send cavalry after them, your cavalry gets poisoned and bogged down in a fight that'll take too long and be too costly. The chameleon skinks, sometimes your best option is to ignore them, if it's possible, or to screen them with the appropriate cheap units where the skinks won't find themselves being very useful against a very expensive target. Let's take a look at the aftermath of this one here, and our all-skink army in this case was actually very successful. It says it was a close victory, but this was actually a pretty huge victory. We only took 350 losses to our skinks. The solar engines didn't pick up a lot of kills, but again, trading a couple of solar engines for Malekith on Seraphon is a trade that I'll take. And the chameleon skinks, you can see here, some of them started to get kills from chasing down units. These ones were the ones harassing Malekith, when the damage really in our infantry segment was going to be done by the Kroxigors and the Skink Priest, and you can see that's what happened. 180 kills between the 3 of those units. But you can see that the Skink cohorts did well enough. They damaged the enemy units. They stood there and formed a line while the Terror and the Doom Flock from the Skink Priest did the rest of the work. Kroxgar was a perfect distraction here. He's not going to be easy to kill when he's on foot. He's going to get knocked around. He can still do anti-large damage. And just putting him over there created that distraction that allowed me to divide and destroy the Dark Elves. Look, one of the most expensive units the Dark Elves fielded never got to be useful. That's this Blackguard. It didn't have an opportunity to be useful. How was it going to make itself known when it was chasing units around the battlefield? Hope y'all enjoyed this one. HeirofCarthage signing out of this one, feeling kind of skinky. Man, try out those strategies in Total War Warhammer 2. You don't have to do the same thing every time. Get creative, or in this case, get skinky. Hey, hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to leave a like. It helps me out a lot. And if you want to see more of these videos, make sure you click the subscribe button. Click the little bell. You'll get notified about the new videos and help keep you up to date. HeirofCarthage signing out for now. I will see you soon.